Okay, we are going to get started. We've got about 55 minutes left with our time together. So we really just hope that this brings you guys good value and really sparks some good quality thinking around how to optimize your content strategies and your online approach to help attract particularly sophisticated investor profiles and personas, financial advisors, the kinds of people that are in high demand for attention and are traditionally just used to getting a lot of bids for their attention. And so hopefully Simon and I today, the real focus is going to be on a system that we use and we're finding quite helpful to create participation with complex investors and buyers. Simon and I have a big idea. We've got a big method that we think is very effective at doing investor acquisition online. But before we get into that, and we're going to unveil what that is in a minute, I want to talk about why now. And we're going to borrow a quote from Bob Dylan. And the song and this line in particular, "You better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone because the times they are a-changin'." It was designed with a particular focus to be influential in people's view in society. Critics later noted that these lyrics particularly have maybe contributed to the song's lasting message of change. And so today I want to borrow this sentiment to capture the essence of the shift. There are some shifts happening economically that's making it more difficult for finance companies to consistently be profitable. On the other side of things, when we say times are changing, what do we mean by that? Well, one of the biggest examples of times changing is disruptive incumbents, and particularly in our case, robo-advisors. And robo-advisors are making a concerted effort to penetrate the millennial and some of the older investor conscience, and they're painting a picture that alpha isn't sustainable, human services are just typically overpriced nowadays, fees and a rebalanced risk-managed beta are really all that matter, and that new technology versus the human touch deliver a better experience and a lower cost base. And so these kinds of messages succinctly being delivered by the robo-advisor communities are slowly starting to shift investor sentiments and stuff. And so there's a couple of things at play here that are a threat to traditional means of investor acquisition on a traditional level. And so this is one of the things that we're seeing in the industry and what are the reasons why it's important to be digital now and to be with the times. A much larger chunk of the complex process, the process moving a complex buyer from a place of uncertainty to a place of certainty, is happening online through self-education before talking to a human. And as we noted earlier, it's up to 57% of that certainty spectrum is being accomplished digitally now before bringing in a real person. So we think of webinars as what's called a spark event in the customer awareness journey. And so we have James here on the left, and James is about to discover a brand. And the webinar program serves as the spark event in the discovery journey of a high net worth retail investor or financial advisor. It's an effective way to let people know that you exist and why they should consider your offering. And this is a unique window, 30, 45 minutes, maybe even an hour, where you can personally influence a scale of investment prospects in a manner that's very difficult to do elsewhere online. Success can be measured. You can establish your key performance indicators. You can define what success looks like, and you can measure every component of the webinar program end to end and know if it's producing value for you right away. Now, the biggest complaint that we get when we approach a prospect is attendance. Chad, attendance is so difficult. It's really, really hard, especially with complicated institutional level buyers or financial advisors who hate getting bothered. It's just a big, big problem. And it seems to be a problem across the industry. 78% of webinars, and this is a recent poll by GoToMeeting, which is a major webinar platform, 78% have less than 50 attendees. As you move up in the attendance categories, the percentage of companies that are able to achieve high levels of attendance go way down. And so that's a big problem. That's something that Simon and I are optimizing to overcome on a regular basis, but this is a big issue. And to break down and articulate this problem, I'm going to hand it over to Simon to basically talk about some of the ways that he and I drive sophisticated webinar attendees on our programs.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. This is a relationship journey, talking about the financial space and investing. You have to be findable, you have to be reachable, and then you have to keep in touch. And like I just mentioned, LinkedIn was pretty much tailor-made for that. So it's a huge part of how you should be thinking about how you're going to get eyeballs on your webinars. Like I mentioned earlier, the great thing about LinkedIn is that it's essentially a database. And the numbers that you see on the slide here are real numbers from LinkedIn that we generated for you. If you actually get Sales Navigator and you put in the right search parameters, you'll actually be able to generate a list of 16,000 family office investors, and all the other ones that you see this. And something else to keep in mind is that people don't really answer cold calls anymore. So if you want to get in front of someone, you have to reach them on a platform that hasn't been, let's call it, sabotaged yet. We first started by doing these LinkedIn messages manually, and it can get really time consuming very quickly. So what we did is we actually developed a piece of software that sends out personalized message to lists of individuals automatically. So essentially you can be going about your day doing whatever you have to do, and really our tool communicates and sends these personalized messages on your behalf. And those are all people that you can then take for coffee or do a one-on-one meeting with. Now that at least you know how to get a large portion of your target market to want to interact with you, what should you lead their attention to? Like Chad mentioned earlier, I mean, we've done it all, right? We've from video to blog posts, to infographics, even live events and seminars. But if there's one thing that keeps hitting it out of the park for us time and time again, it's these webinars. So what we'd like to do now is just to walk you through some webinar best practices based on what we've experimented with ourselves and with our clients. This here is the flow that we like to take on with our webinars and 100% of our marketing these days. The first thing that we advertise is a teaching series. So that's usually a 3-part teaching series with the attendees, where we teach them stuff like what we're talking about today. Part of the attendees of that webinar afterwards will get an email right after the webinar's ended, and that usually is to one-on-one sales conversations, where essentially we have another webinar with them, but it's more of like a thinly veiled sales pitch where we answer their questions a bit better, and we get to talk about specifically what makes Traction House special and how we can help them do this in their business. And usually what happens after that is offline engagement.
So this is really about taking a posture of listening and figuring out what's worth making sense of and focusing on and optimizing for, and what's not. And so we're going to spend a couple of minutes just to wrap up the webinar, and then we're going to jump into some Q&A and some resources here. We're just going to talk quickly about these 12 KPIs. This is what Simon and I really focus on with our clients. This is what we pay attention to. It's what we care about. The first one's total spend. Everything starts with this. Simon and I, inside of our live reporting, we're absolutely transparent about the all-in dollars that it's costing a client. Or if you're running an internal team, you really want to make sure you've got your finger on the pulse of the total budget spend for your webinar program. Qualified leads. So before you actually run the webinar, before you spend any money on promotions, you really want to make sure you do your homework and define what a qualified lead is for you. So the final two really have to do with revenue. You know, at the end of the day, the costs and the resources required to put on a webinar need to translate to dollars back to the firm. And webinars, if the webinars are not a profit center, if they remain a cost center, they're not going to be attractive, and it's going to be more difficult to justify. All right, guys, just to finish things off, we have produced an ultimate webinar checklist for finance managers. So if you are looking to take what we've learned today and really put it into action, that pretty much wraps it up. We just, wanted to first off, thank you so much for your time today. We hope that this has been valuable. We hope we've brought at least sparked some interest towards webinars and really piqued your interest on an understanding of why they're relevant in today's attention economy.